Hello, hello, hello. I almost said morning, 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 but it is 1:26 p.m. here. So hopefully that coffee kicks in. But welcome everybody to another broadcast here of our Next Steps series with Jonathan and Jerry. And I got my good friend JP from Apex Counseling. And then, of course, myself here. I run Viking Performance Training. But today, live, it is October 28th. So it is trick or treat Halloween weekend. But probably much more specific to today's broadcast is this also means we're on the precipice of the winter holidays. So, like Thanksgiving is next month. People will also start already thinking, decorating for Christmas, getting those plans, those thoughts together, which while there's a lot of good times for a lot of people, thankfully it can also create a lot of bad situations or less than positive mental and emotional states for others. So this is the one I've heard JP talk about, for several years. So go ahead and take over, my man.
So the reason we're talking about this in late October instead of November, December is there's a lot of things people can do to make their holidays way better than they usually are, because this is usually a stressful time for people, but you need time to prepare. And so if we did this basically like the week before Thanksgiving, it's kind of too late. Too many things are locked into place already. So that's why we're talking about this early. So one of the things that is important is not a lot of people think about, and I don't know if Jerry's ever heard this part of the quiz. What's the actual point of a holiday?
I mean, yeah, theoretically it would be to think about or honor whatever they put the holiday on, but I would say the actual number of people that do that is pretty slim.
See, that's what a lot of people guess. But if you look at what holidays were originally meant for, they're meant to be breaks. They're meant to be rest and recuperation in some form or fashion. And they might have a theme. There might be rest and recuperation with gift giving, or they might be rest and recuperation, but with extra focus on relationships, like Valentine's Day. But always a holiday is actually meant to be some sort of break. And that's what they originally were meant for, when they would give, the peasants a number of days off a year, basically to keep them from getting so angry and that they would actually rebel. And a lot of people lose focus on the point of a holiday is rest and recuperation. Because one of the reasons I talk about this so much is there's a few people who have holiday stress that's not solvable through what we're about to talk about today, but there's an awful lot of people who can solve their holiday stress to a great degree if they would refocus on what's the point of this. It's actually rest and recuperation. So if we look at it through that lens, and then we look at how people treat their actual holidays, some of the problems become immediately obvious. How many people do you know that try and make it to 3 Thanksgiving meals on the same day?
Oh yeah, lots.
Yeah. Where's the rest? I don't see any rest there. How many people drive themselves mad trying to get like perfect Christmas presents, or worse yet, overspend or go into debt buying Christmas presents? Like, I mean, how many times have we seen that? Uh, and just on and on. Like I could belabor the list for probably 10 minutes. Uh, and what happens is people make a ton of choices that they think are required of them, and sadly, it defeats the entire purpose of having a holiday at all. And one of them that always holds a very special place whenever I talk about this is who people choose to see. Of course, sometimes I choose to be a little crass in my counseling. And so one of the things I tell many of my clients, if we have a good enough relationship that they kind of know who I am a little bit, is that one of the things that the holidays do not require is it does not require that you hang out with assholes or people you don't like. Uh, so many
Title of
people.
the show.
Oh, I didn't even notice that's what you titled
Yeah.
it. um, and so many people spend time around family members or friends, or well, I mean, perhaps not friends, but in some way spend time around people who are toxic to them. And if I was to pick out one thing that's destructive to rest and recuperation the most, it's that it's hanging out with people who are toxic to you. So one of the reasons we're talking about this today is because if people wanted to try and implement something this holiday season, we're basically giving over right about a month for Thanksgiving and nearly 2 months for Christmas for people to like pull together some new way of handling things. So I know I've seen you scribbling madly, so I assume that means you've got some ideas about like things you want to ask.
I am, yeah. I'm trying to keep myself very on point here with it. Well, one I was like, yeah, I had not thought about that at all with the point of a holiday being rest and recuperation, and nerd that I am, I couldn't help but think, but that's even disappeared from our common language, and because that used to be when you said a holiday, I mean, when people would say a holiday, like just like you said, it used to simply mean like a break. It was the term for a vacation or just time off. Like, I'm going to go on a holiday.
And it's still properly used that way in Europe. They'll say they're on holiday.
Exactly, but yeah, like that's just it's completely it's almost completely disappeared from at least American conversation in that term. Now it almost exclusively means specific day, authorized by someone else to not work or do something like that, which is nuts. And the other thing I was thinking of with that is I think a lot of people, because of that, and it's not correct, but because it's a day off of work for most people, that's one of the biggest ways even if they work somewhere where they might work. Um, I mean, I would say with the exception of those people, otherwise most holidays people think of as a day they don't have to work or a day things aren't open. So they think of it superficially as a day of like as a day off, but they're only
Mhm.
thinking about it in terms of I don't have to work or places aren't open, but they don't think about any of the other facets of actually recovering and resting a little bit.
Or worse yet, they're thinking of it in terms of the new special responsibilities they have for that specific day.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be automatic. Like just because you don't have a day at work doesn't mean that it's going to feel restful. I mean, you can almost take that one step further, like with vacations themselves. How many people come back from a vacation feeling like they need a vacation from the vacation? um,
Hmm.
and like I said, like it's for different reasons, but that same idea of putting so much extra stress on themselves and not thinking about it, not preparing accordingly.
Right.
So, yeah. And what's funny to me is how much this is not only kind of fallen to the wayside with modern perspective, but it's actually these stresses have actually become a sense of comedy to a lot of people in a lot of ways. Like it's known and recognized enough where it's source material for comedy. Like, think of how many Christmas movies there are of, like dads competing against each other for, Christmas, like Jingle Bells or I can't remember any of the names of any of them, by the way.
You're
Uh,
thinking of Jingle All the Way is the one you're
Jingle All the
thinking of.
Way. Yep. And like,
National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation,
yep,
like getting too many people together in a house. Yeah,
exactly.
I had never thought of it that way, but you're right. This problem is so well known and has been well known enough for so long that it's the source material for comedy, which in a way is almost a self-perpetuating cycle because then it becomes like, oh, here's the expectation that I'm going to, go do all of this crazy stuff.
Yeah, and I know people, and I don't know any that I know of who are like actually feeling this like a need, but I do know people who are very competitive with like Halloween decorations right now. Like, I'm gonna be the best one on the street. I'm
Oh,
gonna,
oh, 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 I know those guys.
you know, like so yeah, like the fact that there's so much of this based on that, like, instead of the like I said, just instead of focusing on the rest and recovery on it. So to bring it back, I know one of the things you mentioned about with I know that one of the key issues here is that even people who may do a pretty good job of minimizing being around people that are toxic to them, a lot of them may still feel like there is that requirement to see family. Like, they're
Mhm.
my family. I have to see them. And again, like this can be friends too, if they're like multiple families get together or things like that. But if we're going to get low hanging fruit, a pretty common net here is not everybody gets along great with everybody in their family.
Right.
And so what is some of your advice or tools, for people who may do a pretty good job most of the time, but again, they're still mentally stuck in that I have to see my family at this point.
Well, so one of the things that is a good stepping stone, instead of just saying, okay, well, here's a bunch of people I now want to not see to implement this, a better stepping stone for a lot of people is to find some way to limit the time. Because one of the things that happens to a lot of people is spending time with their family is perfectly fine for 12 hours. That like everybody can be nice and civil and non-toxic for that amount of time. But if we start getting up to 16, 24, 36 hours, it starts to degenerate quickly. And so one of the things that I often encourage people to think of is like, okay, you're maybe you're not willing to completely not see toxic folks over the holidays. Can you shorten it in some way? Uh, you know, you have heard me rail time and time and time again about American work culture. However, one of the nice things about American work culture is if you say you have to work, nobody bats an eye. Nobody thinks about it. That's just like, oh yeah, of course you have to work.
Oh man, it's so true. So
So one of the things I've often encouraged people to do is like, okay, can you shorten the time and can you just maybe hide behind work as the excuse? Because obviously it creates its own set of problems if you were to say, I'm only spending 8 hours with the family because after that you guys become toxic. Like
right.
that's just going to craft a whole new set of problems to solve.
This is definitely a situation where the words you choose matter. It's
Yeah.
like very much
And,
um
and let's be very clear because I'm always very hesitant anytime we talk about even a hint of like dishonesty. That's really not ideal. That's not
mhm,
ideal. Uh, but what we're talking about is stepping stone stuff for the express purpose of being able to move a holiday from stressful to restful. So if that has to happen in service of that, then it's not ideal. But like when you deal with toxic people, sometimes you have to make choices that aren't necessarily ideal. And not being fully honest sometimes just has to happen with toxic people, which is sad, but here we are. So I always want to make sure to make it clear that that's an important thing to point out, that it's not good to throw in dishonesty just blithely, right? But the important thing is the stepping stone is find some way to limit the time. uh you know some people will do really stuff, if we sat and thought about it, it is really crazy. Like they'll hang out with their family for an entire week and know that after 2 days that it's just completely destructive to them. And everybody's going to be different, but so start figuring out, if you're going to want to try and implement this somewhat, figure out who are the people that are toxic, who are destructive to your mental state, and figure out what's the amount of time you need to reduce it to make it be somewhat okay. And because everybody's different, it's hard for me to then get too specific after that, because it really becomes a juggling act after that.
mhm. um so like I'm with you fully on, especially like the whole thing, but then especially on the try not to be dishonest about it. And like thinking about it, like I'm sitting there thinking of like solutions or actions while listening to you. Like one of those things you could do is, like let's say that you don't have something, but that doesn't mean, let's say if you're preparing, you could actually put something there, especially if it is a job,
Mhm.
especially if you have some rules, like, you can go and actually request to possibly work the holiday shift. And chances are, not always, but at least depending on that, you may end up with overtime pay, holiday pay, etc. So just a little silver lining there. And then, but maybe
That's
you
not a
can
bad
also
idea.
maybe you can also take some time right before that or right after that off, because like we said, like there's no actual magic situation around the day itself, which makes it rest and recovery. So maybe you take a couple days before or after the holiday off, and it's something that could go hand in hand with that, or just another way to do it is, I'm thinking too, when you have like there's tons of different situations. There's infinite combinations here. But let's say you have, like your family, and there's that, they're the ones you actually love and love to see it, like, and you just have a great relationships with all the time. You wish you could see them more. And then there are the ones who just do not feel that way and you feel toxic. So maybe you can do this, and maybe you can set it up to where like you go see the ones that you love and have a great relationship with a little bit before, or maybe after. You make a plan to go see them then, and maybe avoid the time when the toxic ones are going to be there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's those are several really good ones, and it shows how quickly, like if you give yourself permission to limit the time or not be around certain people, how quickly you can start coming up with strategies and solutions instead of spending the next 2 months stressing yourself out over it. Uh, if we think of another good step, and this one's not for everybody because it's not as easy necessarily, but it's oftentimes a good one and a useful one. Learning how to say no or set boundaries in good ways can oftentimes make this a little better too. So sometimes a person is toxic to you not because they're a horrible toxic person, but because talking about certain things
oh
is
yeah,
stressful.
great. Yeah, that's a great point to make.
Let's take very common parent-child interactions, like adult parent to adult child. Uh, a lot of those interactions, at least the ones I end up helping my clients with, have to do with different forms of like kind of nagging and well-meaning harassment around this life choice or that life choice.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
oh, I mean, you wouldn't be in this position if you'd just become an accountant like I told you to, or who knows? I mean, there's so many flavors of it. But one of the things that can be done is if a person learns to lovingly and without like anger say, no, I'm not talking about that. Like, no, if you bring this up, I got to go because I have no interest in talking about it. That can sometimes work reasonably well too, and it doesn't require you to cut the time. It requires you to cut the conversation or the topic that can become toxic. But notice how quickly like that skill level has to jump up. Like avoiding being there is way easier than how to say no. Like we could do
Right.
a non-podcast series on how to say no.
Right. And then, like you said, like topic is such a big one. I mean, I would, like, without knowing anything about actually talking to as many people as you do about this. I mean, I can see where topic would seem even more common than, like you said, just actually bad relationships. Like, I love my parents. This isn't me, by the way, but like, I love my parents, I love my family until politics comes up. I mean, I feel that has to be an enormous one. I love my parents, I love this until, I mean, heck, actually, outside of politics, I don't even know what other ones come up, because that one just seems so all encompassing for so many people when it comes to a lot of those passionate differences that people have that they can get very quickly worked up about.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, yeah, like if you're the one who has better control of that type of like impulse, and you can avoid bringing things up that are controversial within that group, awesome, and do that. I would I feel like that would also give you some responsibility in a way to possibly be a diffuser if they do come up, or at least try. But what if you are not? So if you're not that person and those topics come up, what is something like? I mean, I'm thinking, yeah, like pick up your dinner plate and go to another room. It's like, who knows, but yeah, like,
Yeah, I mean that's that's a perfectly obvious one. Like instead of leaving where you're at entirely, but leaving the room. Like, okay, time to go hang out on the porch for a little bit, um, and in a way, kind of clearly demonstrating, like, all right, I'm not going to be around for the toxic part of this. Yeah, that's absolutely a wonderful strategy. I've had a couple of clients who have tried out the strategy of deciding to run an errand in those moments and just like avoiding it that way. Clients who have children have a tendency to especially with young children, be like, oh well, let me take the baby in for their feeding, and kind of finding ways to contrive to get out of those temporarily while the toxic subject passes. So yeah, again, a million and one different solutions there available if a person can get into that problem solving mindset and knows that it's okay to just get out.
So if oh shoot, I almost forgot what I was going to say. I didn't almost forget what I was going to say. I actually completely forgot what I was going to say. Oh, okay, never mind. It came back. So let's say like with these, there's a chance that like the harder a hard conversation may come up with this if the person feels like actually either simply questioning if you're avoiding them, or even outright calling it out. You never know. A lot of it will depend on how confrontational possibly these other people might be. So in those situations where you're trying to make these preparations, you either do them ahead of time and like I said, like minimize time that you're there, or even just seem to be working yourself away from toxic conversations. If one of these family members or just toxic relationships calls you straight out or pretty much or questions you, what would be like a good simple script almost for somebody to follow just to feel a little more prepared in that type of situation?
So two things. Number one, because you've asked the question that is like most anxiety provoking to most people.
I figured.
So let me say that most people will never have to answer this question because most of the time people are not nearly as observant as we think they could be. They're not nearly as good mind readers as we think they could be. Uh, there is a small number of people who will pick up on the avoidance, but if it's done with even a modicum of skill, most toxic people will be too busy being toxic to be observant. So
That's really great
happily,
to hear. I mean, yeah, honestly, like that, yeah, that's just great to hear for that situation. I'm like, that's awesome. Good.
yeah. So if you're worried about that, if you're listening to this and worried about it, 90% chance you will not have to answer that question. Now, if you are one of the unlucky 10%, that this is a really good question. Uh, at that point, it's pretty much whatever choice you would like to make out of the numerous bad choices. Because if a toxic person confronts you about avoiding them, what is the non-toxic solution? You can say, yes, I don't like you and I've never liked you. Yeah, that's really going to make things a lot better, right? Although, I mean, points for a bold strategy if you choose to do that one. Uh, you can be dishonest and say, no, it's just this or that, which, as I've already expressed, I'm not a huge fan of doing that. But if you have to, I mean, that's, whatever. Or probably several other things I'm not thinking of, just changing the subject or whatever. But yeah, once it arrives at that point, there's not a lot you can do that's going to make it terrific. But the nice thing is, you almost always have the ultimate option. If necessary, let's say a toxic person confronts you and they just make it bad and bad and bad and bad. Most people listening to this are going to have the option to leave and to leave completely. Most people will have driven their own car to the thing and can get in their car and drive away. So you always have an escape button. One of the things that's most horrifying about the stress that this causes, people feel like they're trapped.
Mhm.
But most people actually aren't. Sadly, there are a few people who will either not be able to leave for transportation issues or have some other thing. But a lot of people listening to this, if you absolutely have to, you can put your suitcase in the car and put your spouse and or child in the car and drive right away and get out of the situation. Hopefully, it doesn't come to that, but at least knowing you have the option removes the disempowered feeling, and at least if you're staying in the situation, you're recognizing that you have a choice to stay or a choice to go. And even just that, even if you do the exact same behavior, it feels much better. Doesn't mean it feels good, by the way. Just to be clear, it makes it feel better than the other thing, which is feeling powerless.
We both just took a drink of coffee like a half second apart. um, funny, like a quote that just suddenly came to mind, or to paraphrase it, it's from, I believe, the Four Agreements. And it mentions how humans are the only creature on Earth to pay for the same mistake more than once. And,
God, isn't that true?
yeah, because it's like, you know, I mean, yeah, like animal. If animal makes a mistake, I mean, assuming it's not like a fatal thing, but otherwise they make it. They, as far as we know, they forget. Maybe they even learn to do better, but they're not thinking like they're not beating themselves up about it. And that is human experience de facto all across the board, as everybody has that. Those, and it's crazy as as far as I know, we're the only ones who will beat ourselves up over something that hasn't happened to us too. So it definitely goes both ways with that. And so thinking about how I think it's very valuable to kind of know that in these situations as well, because like I said, like chances like until you become almost like, lack of a better term, good at this, or just you get in that rhythm, like you've tried some of your exit strategies or minimizing strategies and found out they worked. I feel like there's almost always going to be, that nervousness or that stress, that anxiety, until it actually happens and you get to the other side. Again, that's just the way that we're wired.
Mhm.
So remembering that so much of that is going to make that, being aware that thinking about it will make it worse can help you almost just like at least keep it on like a little calmer, a little more consistent, and at least wait it out until it happens and you try out your strategy. And then, especially if you see success, feel a lot better about it for the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And one of the reasons I gave the time limitation strategy instead of just the don't go is because when you try that and you see that it works, it's basically a little bit of exposure therapy. It's like, oh, this worked. Everything was fine. So maybe if this was still not very good, maybe next year I limit it a little more, or I change how I'm limiting it or something. Um, I do want to point out one that's much less generally usable, but since still a fair number of people find it useful, I'll point this one out as well, because many families are not fully toxic. Many families have one or two members that are a problem.
Yeah.
Uh, and most of those families are aware which member that is. Uh, and one of the strategies that some people have found awfully helpful is saying to the organizer, let's just say it's your parents, but it could be somebody else, saying, "Look, I've had it up to here with having to deal with cousin Eddie at Christmas. I am not going to do that anymore. Please tell me when he'll be there, and I will either visit before or after. I will not be there during his visit." And a lot of people have found that successful in a couple of ways. Way number one is they'll just tell you, and you could just be there when the toxic person is not present. But also, some families end up then adjusting the toxic member and saying, okay, my kid didn't come to Christmas last year because of you, so you either got to figure out your business or you are not coming ever again.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
like I said, that's a much less generally useful strategy than some of the others, and most people are not ready to implement it because that's, in a way, that's a hard conversation to have. It's way easier to exercise avoidance than it is to have that conversation. But for the people who feel ready to try that and feel like they could do that, I at least want people to know that that does work more often than people imagine it does.
Yeah. Fantastic piece of information, my man. Yeah.
So before we go, I have to recap. I got
Yeah.
because here's the important thing. We gave strategies for how to not be around toxic people during the holidays, but the most important thing, if I had to highlight the bullet point, is really the thing we said at the beginning. Holidays are for rest and recuperation. If that is not happening, there's almost no point to having them. So whatever you're doing, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and all of the holidays that are around those times, New Year's, non-Christian religious holidays like Hanukkah, all of them. Whatever choices you're making, make sure you're making choices that lead to rest and recuperation. because that's the entire point of this conversation is to make sure people can actually get through these and recover instead of it just being a great big ball of stress like many people accidentally make it.
And guarantee that, yeah, like anyone in this type of situation takes these steps, even if it's not a toxicity issue and it's simply I get stressed out during the holidays issue. Like, again, the change, the difference you will feel afterwards going back into your normal routine will be huge. Like, you will notice something very, very big. So, all
For
right,
sure.
appreciate it as always. I knew this was going to be a good one. It's going to reach a lot of people, and I think it was also really quite good strategy to have it this far ahead in advance.
Yes. Yes.
All right. So for those of you listening live or soon, happy trick or treating, happy Halloween. And for those of you maybe catching a little bit later, happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas.
See y'all.
See you guys later.